gonna rain. It's gonna rain. You better get ready and bear this in mind. Got your nose, the rainbow sign. It won't be water, we'll find next time. I tell you it's gonna rain. It's gonna rain. You better get ready and bear this in mind. Got your nose, the rainbow sign. It won't be water, but fire next time. Way back.
In Seattle, each October, the rainy season begins. On this cloudy day, at a humble office in an unpretentious neighborhood, a modest man named Ezra Tashome is preoccupied with a place very far away, a place where each year Ezra saves lives, a place where each October the rainy season ends.
Got you know the rainbow sign. It won't be water, but fire next time. Way back in the wild day, no to the people that it's gonna rain. But when he told them, they waited no mind. And when it happened, he was up behind. I tell you it's gonna rain.
Ezra?
Well, tanasteling.
Tanasteling.
That's a word, that's a greeting that you would hear in Ethiopia when people greet you and say tanasteling.
A restaurant in Seattle serves cuisine from Ethiopia to 36 members of Rotary and their families.
This is called injera. It's not a napkin. And the sauce is, there's a lentil sauce, split pea, and there's carrot and potatoes, and also some lamb. And then you just scoop whatever you want. Enjoy it. Simple as that.
Ezra has repeated this ritual since the mid-1990s. Every year, he introduces fellow Rotarians to African culture to help prepare for a trek that for many will change their lives.
Just want to say, first of all, thank you for your commitment and dedication to join us to eradicate polio. And my name is Ezra Tashome. I was born in Ethiopia. I grew up there, came to Seattle area in 1971. I haven't left except going back and forth so many times.
Each year, after the rains in Ethiopia end, the battle to beat back polio begins.
Citizens of Protection, Kansas are really getting protection. The Tots are the first to face the Salk vaccine needle. This miss isn't quite sure about the whole thing, but, well, it really wasn't so bad. Next. Junior is blissful, but he gets the idea. Listen.
Polio was once a preoccupation in the developed world. Everyone, it seemed, knew someone who had been crippled or even killed by a virus which targeted the young and often the healthy.
Those are the kind of things until...
Ezra's fellow Rotarian, Steve Crane, grew up an athlete: football, baseball, swimming. In high school, Steve could run like the wind until, that is, the day he was rushed with a fever from his bed.
To get in the car, to go to the hospital, to have the analysis that resulted in my being diagnosed with polio and not being able to get out of bed and stand a day later.
Overnight, developed a fever and couldn't walk.
Rotarian Denny Wilford still carries a slight limp from when he was just a toddler.
Initially, what my mom told me was that they didn't expect me to live. So I was the first person in our family to actually have professional photos taken because they thought I was going to die. So they dressed me up and took me down to the photo studio and got my picture taken, but I did live.
But in America, where almost every child is vaccinated, polio's menace is fading from memory.
But it's not unusual to talk to a crowd of people that have no knowledge of anybody having polio. They might say, I thought it was all gone.
They just don't recognize what polio was, and fortunately, it's been eradicated in this country for long enough so that that's the case.
Yeah. State Farm, this is Ezra.
In 1996, Ezra attended a Rotary conference in Africa. He was stunned to see hundreds of crippled children, none of whom had access to vaccine.
I said, these kids are crippled for not having these 2 drops? And the answer was yes.
The conference was in his native home, Ethiopia. And though he had been a Seattle Rotarian since 1984, it was the first he'd ever really paid attention to a pledge by Rotary International to rid the world of polio.
And I said, as long as I live, I want to come back every year.
My name is Sandra Schnell, and I'm from the White Rock Peninsula Group.
I'm Clint Morgan. I'm from here in Seattle.
I'm CJ Kaler. I'm from the Rotary Club of Sammamish.
Ezra did go back, every single year. Each year there were more volunteers. Each year he was accompanied by 2 close friends, Rotarians Ralph Monroe and Dave Weaver.
Know us a little bit. My name is Dave Weaver, and this will be my 15th trip to Ethiopia.
Yeah, Ralph is calling me on the other line. Hold on. Good morning, Ralph. Not a problem. I'm already in the office, and I'm talking with Weaver on the other line, so...
And each year he makes final preparations to take leave from employees, take leave from family, to sacrifice weeks of his own income and own comfort for the sake of other people's children.
Okay, thanks, bye. You know, I've been blessed to be in this country, and I've been blessed to have raised my children. And yet, as I look into those kids, if they were my own children, what would I do?
On the streets of Addis Ababa, the often thin line between luck and misfortune is on daily display. Tulan Hinu was once a healthy 23-year-old shepherd. Overnight, polio stole his legs. The culprit was a microscopic virus, one of 3 types of virus which, since the dawn of civilization, have entered the bodies of just about every person on Earth. In the developing world, it's a disease spread by poor sanitation, via human fecal contamination in water, soil, or most commonly, unclean hands. In practically every case, wild virus triggers little more than an upset stomach, perhaps a fever. But for an unlucky few, roughly 1 in 200, the virus escapes the digestive system and invades the nervous system. Once there, it attacks muscle neurons and shuts down reproduction of new cells.
You could compare it to leprosy or to a gangrene, where that whole part of the person's body actually doesn't revive from it, and it kills off all those cells and all the nerve endings in those areas, so that it just dies off.
Ezra, do we have some drops? I found a child needs to be vaccinated.
Linda Vinzel knows polio.
Who's got some polio drops?
Dr. Vinzel is a polio eradication expert for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She and Ezra are welcomed into a village near Diradawa, not far from Ethiopia's most recent polio outbreak.
Tatafi. Linda.
99.5% of those exposed to wild virus do not end up paralyzed and are rewarded with lifelong immunity to the disease. Unfortunately, their fecal wastes, for a while anyway, remain contagious.
And so they pass it on, and they're like silent transmitters of the virus to other people. So the majority of people won't get disease, but they will be able to have the virus going into their system.
It's a vicious cycle for a disease with no known cure, and it might seem quite hopeless, except that there is a proven weapon.
Do we have vaccine?
A simple, straightforward way for everyone on Earth to protect themselves without passing on polio to others.
Every child needs to be vaccinated.
Vaccinated, every child.
What it does is it causes the immune system to react almost like it had the wild virus. And because it's safe and because it's not the wild virus, then their immune system will remember that virus. And if they're ever exposed to the real thing, they're protected because it's like their bodies are primed to actually react and protect that virus from circulating in their bodies.
In the developed world, the vaccination call to arms has been a roaring success. Since the mid-1950s, nearly every child in wealthier nations has been given the gift of inoculation, and almost no one in those countries now comes down with polio. There's more good news. Animals can't get polio. Unlike so many other diseases, the virus isn't transmitted between animals and humans, which means, in theory, polio can be wiped off the face of the earth. Back in 1988, wild polio virus was endemic in more than 125 countries. That's when Rotary International, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the Centers for Disease Control set out to raise enough money to vaccinate virtually every child in the world.
It's almost like when President Kennedy said, "We will put a man on the moon." Everybody was focusing to put every expertise and know-how to get there.
It worked astonishingly well. In little more than 2 decades, wild virus was exterminated in all but just 4 nations: Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nigeria. Places where polio stubbornly persists, places where you might think that extreme poverty or ongoing conflict would make vaccinations all but impossible.
You know, it's amazing. They've had days of peace, and they've managed to work with the Taliban and with the different warlords to actually have people lay down their arms, stop the fighting, and let the vaccinators in.
But to bring life-saving vaccine to every child in the world, Rotarians must overcome a host of barriers. In countless villages throughout Africa, local healthcare workers must go door to door, calling on friends and neighbors. How many kids younger than 5 live here? Have they received all their polio drops and boosters?
Who's got the vaccine?
4 children live here, including a 3-year-old boy and a 7-month-old baby named Magartu. Magartu's mother, Desare, welcomes the vaccinations, was eager to invite the team of yellow-vested Rotarians and local volunteers into her courtyard for polio drops and a spot of ink on her child's fingernail to show she'd been vaccinated.
Other hand, oh yeah. Don't get it in my face. Sweet. So pretty.
But door-to-door campaigns can be daunting. In this part of Ethiopia, streets, such as they are, have no names, and houses have no numbers.
This is not like map in Phoenix, Arizona, where every street's laid out north, south, east, west. Here you've got alleys and streets and trails and villages and huts here and huts there.
Another challenge. Polio vaccine can be fragile. Without proper protection, it will quickly spoil in the equatorial heat.
The part is that little dot on the vaccine bottle. This will provide vaccine for 20 children. That little dot is white as long as this vaccine is kept cold. It was discovered and invented by PATH in Seattle, Program for Alternatives to Technology and Health. And if this vaccine gets warm, that dot turns black. And the vaccine's no good, and we know that. So it's kept in here with these...
So on vaccination day, time is always of the essence. And on this day, the process comes to a sudden, unexpected hope.
So did he not want the child to be vaccinated? The father here did not want the child to be vaccinated. The mother has heard about polio and wants the child to be vaccinated. And so these guys here are explaining that this polio will cripple this child and ruin this child forever.
Even one unvaccinated child can become a carrier. Enough carriers can spark an epidemic. It's no small concern. When vaccinations were briefly suspended in one corner of Nigeria, new cases of the virus were reported throughout the heart of Africa, spread quickly by famine, war, or even annual religious pilgrimages. Fortunately, Muslim leaders have worked hard to help overcome pockets of concern about vaccine safety. The apprehensive father lives in a predominantly Islamic region of Ethiopia, but his religious faith has little to do with his objections.
What happened is this gentleman is a polio victim, and his concern was basically to make sure the children are vaccinated properly and their ages also be documented properly.
How do you feel about him raising questions?
I think that's wonderful. I think he's got the proper attitude, and he's not saying we shouldn't vaccinate. He said that people would just rush, and he didn't want to see that.
And in fact, concern about whether vaccinations are being properly administered is one of the main reasons why Dr. Wenzel has joined Ezra on this journey. Millions have been spent on the eradication effort, and more is still needed.
But I don't understand, Ezra. They don't have enough vaccine now here in...
Not enough vaccine.
Everyone, including the Gates Foundation and Rotary International, is determined to see that those millions are not wasted by incomplete or inefficient vaccination campaigns.
So kids that were missing, but she found them and she gave them vaccination.
So for the whole day, they didn't miss one child? That's kind of... All the children are vaccinated. They found all of them?
Yeah, they're all vaccinated.
The bottom line for nearly everyone is the fervent desire to wipe out polio so that money can be spent instead on a host of other urgent needs. The village of Gerbo long had a particularly urgent need: clean water. When Bill and Karen McCarthy first visited Gerbo, women and kids spent an hour each day hiking to the nearest stream.
Then they had to carry 2 40-pound jerry cans of water back from there. Now it's a 5-minute situation. Just talked to one of the ladies and she's very happy. Life is easier.
Clean water is now pumped to Gerbo from a new well, thanks to a Rotary fundraising drive led by the McCarthys. This wasn't a polio project, it was a people project, made possible only because Bill and Karen first came here to vaccinate for polio.